Evening all. Well, today I want to start a series of videos on the topic of 10 people who define the progressive left today. Now, what this means is that there are 10 people I've identified in the public sphere, in the political sphere, academia, media, culture, the arts, news reporting. And these are the 10 people who I think are having an extremely profound effect on political discourse today and how they're influencing and shaping the ideas of the modern progressive left. Now, here's a disclaimer up front. I describe my own politics as being somewhere on the right. What that means is that I am based mostly around conservatism. But I do borrow heavily. My thoughts and sometimes my ideas also drift towards the centre-right, and they also borrow a bit from the libertarian right. So I'm kind of this mashup. I haven't found a one single term that accurately describes every idea I have politically. But I want to take this moment to kind of distance myself and to denounce Nazism, fascism, and the alt-right. All those three can get stuffed as far as I'm concerned. They are against what I believe in. I believe in a lot of freedom of the individual. I believe in a small state, letting people just get on with their lives and just upholding the laws that need to be upheld so we don't all hurt, kill, and rob from each other. I reject the idea of a white ethno-state. So if anybody subsequently calls me a Nazi, fascist, alt-right, you can get stuffed. I'll call my lawyer. I'm married to one. So, so with that out of the way, let's get on with this. So the first person on my list, who I think has quite a profound effect on the progressive left today, is Owen Jones. What a surprise. Now, Jones rose to prominence because he wrote a book called Chavs, where he felt that a whole underclass of British society was being demonised. There's this label Chav, which stood for Council House Adult Vermin. These were kind of working class people who were in favour. The style was important, but it was bad style. It was cheap knockoff style, and it was linked to antisocial behaviour orders, and it was associated with a kind of vulgarity. That was the media perception, I would say, which filtered into the public. And Jones wrote this book about this phenomena. Who were the chavs and why were they being targeted this way? Why were all these epithets being said about them? So he made his name off the back of that. But he emerged at a time when left-wing punditry was going through changes. So for decades, left-wing punditry in the newspapers and on television and radio were dominated by two people. One is Polly Toynbee, very much from the Islington, Fabian, pseudo-intellectual left. And she had all her columnist credentials, and she'd been on the Moral Maze, and she'd done a lot of radio, been a panelist, Question Time panelist, and everything. But she's getting old, and she is very much associated with the previous era of left-wing thought, coming sort of hovering around the kind of Blairite New Labour era. The other one is Kevin Maguire, a far more blue-collar style of political commentator who writes for the Daily Mirror, gets on television and radio a lot as well. Maguire is also getting old, but he was also being seen as increasingly curmudgeonly. Maguire is one of those people where if he's invited onto a television or radio to comment on a breaking news story, they'll usually have Maguire and his right-wing journalist equivalent, on a panel being asked these questions. And Maguire will spend almost as much time, sometimes even more, attacking his right-wing colleague as he will commenting on the political issue he's been invited on to comment on in the first place. So Owen Jones is emerging. He's emerging as the next new talent, and he plays off this. He's older than he looks, but he trades on that kind of boyish and youthful aspect to his personality, which plugs into this idea that the left are now pandering almost exclusively to the under 30s, wanting to reduce the voting age as well. So he is very much someone who taps into that idea. Pardon me. So there are two sea change moments that I think mark the change from Owen Jones as the author of Chavs and someone who is representing a kind of new left-wing thinking into the Owen Jones that we got now, who is in turn influencing people. And the two sea change moments are this. Before the last general election of 2017, Owen Jones made a video where he was openly criticising Jeremy Corbyn and Momentum. He was saying that it was that the Conservatives were firmly entrenched and that the voters were not impressed by the splits within the Labour Party. And Jones was making an impassioned appeal for Corbyn to kind of re-embrace the social democrat left and to find different ways of connecting to the British public without going down the kind of hard Marxist socialist path. And he made this video, and events superseded it. Corbyn did better in the 2017 general election than was expected, and the social democrat wing of Labour were chastened. And Jones changed. He completely changed. He's become an arch Corbynista. He has gone even further to the left than he had before. He is now completely 100% on message. And another sea change moment happened to Jones, and this is the one he's most famous for, is that he was on a Sky News discussion in the aftermath of the Orlando shootings. And he was with... he was being interviewed by a Sky journalist called Mark Longhurst, referring to my notes there. And with Julia Hartley-Brewer. And what happened was that they were talking about the reasons for the Orlando shooting, and Jones maintained that it was a homophobic attack. But Hartley-Brewer and Longhurst introduced the possibility that there was a radical Islamic element to it, which Jones would not stand for at all. To him, it was a 100% homophobic attack, and you couldn't you couldn't mention the Islamic side of it, even though the evidence was there. And so he got up and stormed off the set. It was a famous moment, and it defined him. And it revealed an aspect to his character where he is unable to hold two competing ideas in his mind simultaneously and try and see if there's any synthesis. Owen Jones cannot understand the concept of the old philosophical concept of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. There's only thesis and antithesis to Jones. So he can't hold these two things in his head, and it has manifested itself subsequently. His personality has changed since those two events, or maybe they were always there and he kept them suppressed, and he doesn't feel the need to suppress them anymore. And so he has ended up, instead of the person that said in a video that it's time to reach out to people who are not necessarily automatically on side. And the chap who interviewed Jacob Rees-Mogg saying, I disagree with Jacob Rees-Mogg, but I want to meet with him. I want to discuss things. I want to see where he's coming from. Now, Owen Jones accuses everybody who disagrees with him of fascism. He sees fascists and Nazis everywhere. The term the right, the far right get intermingled. And this is a deliberate ploy. He is one of these people that deploys this tactic. If you can smear everybody who disagrees with you as somehow far right, it's just that tiny step towards Nazism. That's what he's playing. That's the game he's playing. Because he cannot see that somebody can be both a political person and maybe have a valid point, a political person who's in opposition to him, and maybe having a valid point in a couple of cases. He cannot see that. There is a wall. He accuses Trump of building a wall and opposing walls, but Jones is building a wall faster than anybody else between people like him and everybody else, fascists. And now interviews have got to be on Owen Jones's terms. He gets interviewed by Andrew Neil. He doesn't like it. He doesn't talk about he doesn't refute the questions that Neil puts in, because Neil's a brutal. He's a bare knuckle boxer of an interviewer. And what Jones did was that he can't punch back against Neil's arguments and questions. So what he does is he goes after Neil himself. And then after he has another one of his hissy fit interviews, this time with Andrew Neil, he goes off and he writes a letter to the BBC, writes this open letter calling for Neil to be sacked. This is Owen Jones's world. If you're against him, you have got to be removed from the playing field. And he will whine. He is playing the image of the whiny tantrum kid. He's now in his early 30s. And he is playing this. It's not fair. They need to be stopped. They're going after me. It's not fair. And this is how it manifests, and it's leaking into the public discourse. It's leaking onto Twitter, and it's leaking into social media, and his interminable Guardian columns where he is just accusing, pointing the finger. They're not nice. They should be stopped. And the peak Owen Jones moment is when he wrote a Guardian opinion piece saying the centre were the biggest threat in society. The centre are the biggest threat. This is a whiny, spoiled brat having a temper tantrum and trying to pretend that it's all about caring for the dispossessed, for the downtrodden. And sometimes he'll pop up for a photo call. But if the downtrodden then say to him, well, actually, what we want, we want some. We don't want the state coming in and telling us what to do and telling us how to live our lives and handing out benefits. Can we have some jobs? Can we have some big business up here? Can we get out of the EU? He'll switch those voices off and denounce them as a kind of, the thuggish fascists in our midst. So this is Owen Jones, and this is why he is in a very ludicrous way. He's quite a ludicrous character, but he's imposed himself on the political discourse of this country. He is often invited on TV shows. I think producers think, well, is today a day when Owen's going to throw another wobbly? But newspapers indulge him. He has pretty much everything at his feet, and it's still not enough. And that is my first choice for 10 people who define the modern progressive left. And until next time, have a good day.